On November 30th, 1999, Jordanian officials intercepted a phone call between Abu Hoshar and Abu Zubaydah, during which Abu Zubaydah said, "The time for training is over." There was no context. The Jordanians, understandably, didn't want to take chances. They rounded up all the individuals we had been monitoring. 16 were taken in, including Abu Hoshar. Deek and Abu Zubaydah were in Pakistan, and Raid Hijazi was in Syria, so they were not among those detained. The Jordanians interrogated the operatives and quickly gained confessions, some additional details of the plot. Hijazi's younger brother and the co-conspirator revealed the motto for the Millennium attacks. The season is coming, and bodies will pile up in stacks. The information the operatives gave included the location of hideouts. Jordanian officials again raided several, recovering detonators, including walkie-talkies that Raid Hijazi had purchased in London, weapons, forged passports, and a CD version of Khalil Deek's Encyclopedia of Jihad. Initially, we couldn't find any chemicals. The operatives were questioned further, and one explained where a trap door for the makeshift basement could be found. His directions led Jordanian officials to the spot. When the hatch was opened, a terrible stench drifted up. A ladder was in place, and one of my Jordanian official associate's friends was sent down in it. He rushed back up a few seconds later and said that the basement was full of urns and chemicals. The acids were leaking and the floor was covered. The official started coughing and shouted, "I've been poisoned. I can't breathe." He had indeed inhaled dangerous chemicals. Someone quickly brought him some milk and instructed him to drink it, telling him it would clear the poison from his system. After drinking the milk, and to the amusement of those present, he said he felt better. After the arrest of the operatives in Jordan, and after the detainees had detailed Khalil Deek's role in the plot, the Pakistani authorities agreed to arrest him. They raided his center and took him into custody. There, he was blindfolded, with blackout goggles put over his eyes and duct tape wrapped around his goggles, making it impossible for him to see. The Pakistanis did not tell him what they would do to him. They contacted an official which sent the military phone to Pakistan and also a private plane to pick him up. Once in Jordan, still with no one saying a word to him and still blindfolded, he was taken to a Jordanian jail, placed before a picture of King Abdullah II, who had assumed power 10 months earlier and after the death of his father, King Hussein. Only then were the goggles and duct tape removed. It was a few seconds before Khalil Deek's eyes adjusted to the light. He focused on the picture in front of him. His face dropped. He knew that the game was up and that the plot had failed. Another graduate of Abu Zubaydah's Chaldean camp was Ahmed Wassam, a wily Algerian. He falsely claimed political asylum in Canada in 1994 using a fake passport and a story about persecution. He supported himself in Canada through crime and dealing in fake passports. While there, he met a veteran of the Chaldean camp who recommended that he head there for training. Before he left for Chaldean in 1998, Wassam acquired a legitimate Canadian passport through a fixer who had stolen a blank baptism certificate from a church. Using the passport, he traveled easily to Pakistan and then to Afghanistan, where he went to Chaldean. There, he received basic terrorism training and learned how to build explosives. He got to know Abu Zubaydah, who was impressed with Wassam's ability to produce passports and quickly put him to work. Eventually, Wassam returned to Canada with the intention of planning an attack inside the United States with other Algerians he had met at Chaldean. They spent time discussing and planning attacks, with Abu Zubaydah offering advice on launching them. Wassam returned to Canada fully expecting his fellow Algerians to follow him. When they couldn't get the documents to enter the country, he decided to strike without them. He rented a Chrysler sedan, hid explosives in the spare tire, and drove to the car ferry at Victoria, Canada, which was sailed to Port Angeles, Washington. He intended his final destination to be Los Angeles International Airport, which he would bomb on the Millennium. On December 14th, I was called into a secure room in the U.S. Embassy in Amman to receive a call from FBI headquarters. They told me that an Algerian named Ahmed Rassam had been arrested trying to bring explosives into the United States from Canada. They didn't yet know exactly what he intended to do, but they suspected a Millennium attack. While Rassam had cleared the Immigration and Naturalization Service pre-inspection station in Victoria, his passport was a legitimate Canadian one, so there were no red flags. It was his suspicious activity on the other end that prompted the attention of an astute customs official. Rather than getting off the ferry with his Chrysler when it was his turn, Rassam waited for every one of the other drivers to get their vehicles off first. Apparently, he thought that the last car would receive less attention. The customs officer noted that not only was this a strange fact, but that Rassam seemed quite nervous, and he referred him to an official for a secondary inspection. When the agent at the secondary inspection began to pat Rassam down, a standard procedure, he panicked, tried to run away. He was quickly stopped and the car was searched. At first, the customs staff thought that he was connected to drug smuggling. But once the timing devices were found, they realized that there was a bigger issue, and the FBI was called in to take over. I shared this information with the Jordanians. It seemed from our inquiries that Rassam might possibly be connected to the other Millennium bombers. All or most had trained at Kaldin. Rassam's apprehension underscored the importance of Abu Zubaydah's camp and provided a warning that terrorists were plotting to strike not only in Jordan, but elsewhere. Having learned that Khalil Deek and Abu Zubaydah worked closely with the UK-based operative Moazzam Beg to raise funds, we passed this information on to our friends in SO13 and the MI5. British authorities were already aware of Beg's activities and his connections to suspected terrorists in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I worked in both Jordan and the United Kingdom during this period. One morning in the year 2000, while I was in England working with the SO13 on a separate investigation, a clearly surprised Alan Fry and John Bunn told me that the MI5 and SO12, the intelligence counterpart to SO13, had raided Al-Ansar, a bookstore operated by Beg, and Beg's home in Birmingham. They had arrested him. Because SO13 hadn't spent time building a case against him, however, after a preliminary interview, he was released and, like Libby in Manchester, escaped the country. We only caught Beg years later in Pakistan after 9/11. Bassam Kanj was born in Lebanon in 1965. In 1984, he moved to the United States and married an American woman, becoming a naturalized U.S. citizen. He then followed a path that was becoming familiar to us, fighting the Soviets in Afghanistan. He returned to the United States when the war ended, and in subsequent years regularly traveled back to Afghanistan to train at Kaldin. It was under Abu Zubaydah that he picked up the alias Abu Aisha and met Raid Hijazi, Khalil Deek, and others with U.S. citizenship, and frequented the master terrorist facilitator's camp. In 1995, Kanj moved to Boston and started driving a cab for the same company as Raid Hijazi. Two were good friends. They had roomed together before Kanj was married and continued to share quarters with Kanj's wife was away. In 1998, Kanj left the United States and went to Lebanon, where he joined a radical group that called itself Takfir wal Hijra. On New Year's Eve 1999, Kanj led a group of around 150 Sunni terrorists to the Dania mountain region in northern Lebanon. The group was predominantly Palestinians and Syrians. Kanj had met many of them in training camps in Afghanistan. Their stated aim was to impose Sharia law in Lebanon. They first ambushed an army unit in the village of Bassoun, killing a few soldiers and kidnapping a commander officer. When the Lebanese military sent in troops, the terrorists went on a rampage and for 4 days battled the troops, killing anyone who got in their way. The slaughter did nothing to further the terrorists' single-minded devotion to their goal of imposing Sharia law. Another in the Millennium series of plots which was disrupted. With Abu Hoshar, Khalil Deek, and the others in custody in Amman, Jordan, and the group's explosive materials confiscated, we at the FBI had successfully thwarted the plot in Jordan. Those who were jailed provided significant information about the terrorist network. The only loose ends we knew about Hijazi, who was still on the run when we rounded up the suspects, that he had been traveling back to Pakistan and was somewhere in Syria, so he never returned to Jordan, and Abu Zubaydah, who was somewhere in Afghanistan or Pakistan. Until the Millennium dawned, however, we obviously wouldn't know for certain whether we had apprehended everyone. I stayed in Jordan, and on New Year's Eve, I went with Stephen Gordon, then rotating in the country, to Abin Circle, the main square in Amman, the Jordanian equivalent of Times Square. We told the FBI office we'd update them on what did or didn't occur. As the clock struck midnight, we heard small explosions and saw people running in every direction. We ran behind a parked car to take cover. What had we missed? I asked people in Arabic what was happening. It turned out that a stage holding fireworks had collapsed, sending them shooting into the crowd. Stephen and I looked at each other with relief and started laughing. I called the New York FBI office from my phone. It was put through to John O'Neill in the Joint Terrorism Task Force Command Center in New York. Jordan's okay. Everything is good, I told him. Happy New Year, he said. You guys did a great job. I put my cell phone back in my jacket and turned around to speak to Stephen, who had been standing next to me, but he wasn't there. Then I saw him in the distance at an ATM. Like everyone, he had been reading stories of accounts getting messed up at the Millennium. Switching from 1999 to 2000 was said to be hard for bank computers, so he wanted to check that his money was safe. He withdrew some cash so that his account was untouched and walked back to me smiling and waving his Jordanian banknotes.